Richard Hart explained the buy and burn feature of Pulsex in this video, which is exactly what I talked about in a video from 2 weeks ago and how it actually creates selling pressure on Pulse and Hex. So I did an update video because people didn't believe me in that video, just showing the clip with Richard in it, confirming exactly what I talked about in the video, not this one, but a previous video from a week ago. And I posted that up to Twitter, and it looks like Richard wasn't too fond of it. So we're going to talk about that in detail in this video. But first, if this is your first time here, what's good? My name is Sam, and for those of you who are returning, it's good to freaking see you. And if you're returning, I don't know why you haven't already pressed that like button and subscribe button. Also, if you're returning, you enjoy the content, clearly, take a second, press the share button, send this over to Twitter, send this over to Facebook, help grow the community and provide value to the other people who will actually see this. So what we're going to do is start by playing this clip. It's about 90 seconds long to give you an idea. Then we're going to talk about what was in this clip. Then we're going to jump over to Twitter, talk about these tweets here from the back and forth that I had with Richard on Twitter. And then we're going to cover something else that Richard is either purposely not talking about or maybe just hasn't thought about in terms of how this still is creating sell pressure on Pulse and Hex, using this chart from Nomics on the price of Hex and this example that we put together in a spreadsheet on the fees involved. So let's start with this video, and we're going to just play this.
When Pulsex tokens are burned, whose tokens exactly are getting burned? It's a great question. It's a great question. So the fee2 address in the Uniswap v2 code, which is forked to create the Pulsex contracts, scrapes a percentage of fees, 21.7% of fees. And those fees, when you do a swap, are paid in the form of the token that you're getting rid of. So if you were to swap, say, Pulse for Hex, then the contract would scrape some of the Pulse. And if you were to swap Hex for Pulse, it would scrape some of the Hex. Then when someone adds or removes liquidity to that Hex Pulse pair, as part of their add or remove function, that person pays to send the scraped tokens to the fee2 address.
So that's going to be the step in the process that we're going to talk about in a second, and how this is what actually causes the first part of the buy and burn function, and then the several steps in a moment are actually what causes the selling pressure.
And so the fee2 address acquires over time, as people add and remove liquidity from the LP, 21.7% of the fees, and the fees are whichever pair was gotten rid of to get the other side of the pair. And so the tokens that are being burnt, and so what happens is now anyone can run a contract which then uses those scraped fee2 address paid fee percentages, and then buys Pulsex with those so the inputs are the scraped fees from those other coins, and then it trades them for Pulsex, and then those Pulsex are burnt.
Okay, so sounds complex if you haven't thought about it before, but it's pretty easy. You can break it down into 3 parts. The first part is the swap, right? And the example that you used is Hex Pulse. If somebody is selling Pulse for Hex, then a portion of the fee is going to be paid in Pulse, right? And a portion of the fee is going to, so step one, they're going to pay that fee. when LPs, so there's the liquidity provider, step 2, the liquidity providers add or remove from that pool, so there's the hex pulse pair, right? They put in, say, 10,000 hex and 10,000 pulse. And when somebody pulls money out or puts more money in, part of the cost of doing that is paying to move those fees to the fee 2 address. Step 3 is once they're in the fee 2 address, then anybody could, and I don't know how this is actually done, but I'm sure it is in the somewhere on Pulsex, like DApp. Anybody can run a contract function, which basically takes the fees that have been accrued in there from the swapping and burns those. Well, to get to the stage of burning, what they have to do is swap through different ways, potentially depending on the tokens that were actually in the fee, right? And then they buy Pulsex, right? So you're like, okay, cool, Pulsex is gonna have constant selling pressure. Yes, cool, awesome, perfect, that's fantastic. Now, Pulse is gonna have selling pressure and Hex is gonna have selling pressure, right? And that's the essence of what we were talking about, right? This buy and burn feature from the fees creates selling pressure on Pulse and Hex, right? That's what we talked about in this video and the video from about a week ago, the same exact thing. Now, here on Twitter, I said, anyone watch Richard Hart's live stream, right? Where he can, whoa, thumbs up for that. Audio quality, I'm gonna get a new mic at some point. Where he confirmed what I said last week, that Pulsex buy and burn will create selling pressure on Hex and Pulse. Full video, where Richard Hart explains it in the clip, right, is what I posted there. And then I put a video link here. And within about a minute or two, Richard Hart responds, haha, fees are generated when somebody sells 100% of a thing in a trade for something else. 0.06% of that total already dumped sale is sent to buy and burn. How much bigger is the 100% already sold than the tiny 0.06%, right? And then if you take the inverse of this, or like 1 divided by this, is probably how he comes up with this number, but he actually corrects himself. It's not this number, right? So I said, right, because in this video, he mentions 21.7%. So I'm like, okay, 21% is what you mentioned is sent to the address in the stream the other day, question mark. And he responds, 0.06% burn is 21% of 29%, or 0.29%, right? So to make sense of that, right, you have a 0.29% fee, right? 76% of that fee goes to LPs, a portion of that goes to him, right? And then a portion of it goes to buy and burn. 21.7% goes to that. If you look at it relative to the total fee amount, it's 0.06%, right, according to his math. So I said, all you're doing is confirming what I said, though. The swap is selling. The buy and burn doesn't happen when it happens when the LP is added or removed, which creates additional selling. Right? And then he responds again. No, it's just staggering the total sale from 100% to 99.96% instant and 0.06% on a buy and burn. The total sell is the same size as the guy that sold, causing it all in the first place. So when you, well, let's try to grab the essence of what he's saying there. He's still confirming exactly what I'm saying, but he's implying, from my understanding, that the impact is going to be trivial, right? Because you have 99.94% of the magnitude of the effect, and which I'm going to show you is actually much greater than this in a moment. And then there's only going to be a tiny bit that's going to be burnt, right? According to the math he's doing, right? And I just didn't run the numbers, so I just can't confirm that that's the case, but I believe that would be the case, right? So when you look at what he's saying, and you're like, okay, well, the magnitude is going to be so trivial compared to the amount of that, right? So if somebody's selling $1 million worth of Pulse, right, they're selling 99.94% of that is going to be going through, where only a 0.06% of that is not going to be going through, and then it's going to go through and be purchased for hex, right? So you're like, okay, well, that would make sense. The biggest portion of that is going to be going through right away, right? But what happens in game theory is that you look at things in a, you can look at them as like single stage or like a series, right? Or like over time. You can think of like a series as like over time. And if we were to just play one game together, right, then the level of trust is different and people interact differently in game theory. Whereas if you play a game with multiple rounds or a series or over time, right? You play it multiple times, different things happen, right? Players act different. So when you look at one transaction, this would be accurate in terms of the semantics, like how you want to fucking word it. You could say I'm not right just because your ego's there or whatever the case is, but you're saying exactly what I'm saying, right? But when you take a look at reality, there are many days in the market, right? If you look at traditional finance, right, the trading windows, trading days in traditional legacy finances, like around 270 days a year. In crypto, that's 365 days a year, right? And there's many days where you have virtually no price movement or very little price movement because you have flows going in both directions. So when we go back to this, if you look at just one transaction, or this probably would be a better example, if you just look at one transaction, this is 100% true. Now, what happens when you have the pair, hex and pulse, and the price doesn't move, but the volume on that swap is, say, 2 million bucks, 10 million bucks, right? With back and forth. Some, for whatever economic reasons one person has to sell Pulse to switch to hex, cool. That happens in that direction. And then there's one or many players who play in the opposite direction and they go from hex to Pulse, right? And that happens all the time. All you need to do is look at reality. And when the price doesn't change, right? Because it's happening during the day. It doesn't happen like in terms of the actual price of the token moving, because it's happening on a continuous basis throughout the day. That also just racks up fees. So there's no actual price movement here, right? There's going to be a very small amount, 21.7% of the total fee amount, that is just going to continue to accrue in that fee to address, that will continue to be activated to go through and sell. Even if, right, there's $1 million that goes one direction and $1 million that goes the other direction, the price stays exactly the same. Stays exactly the same. There's still sell pressure. Like, that's the point. On a one stage, on a one level, like just you and I playing one game at one point in time, yes, this is 100% accurate. Completely agree. I mean, in terms of the semantics, however you want to call it, right? But when you look at it over time, what I'm talking about actually happens. You just need to look at reality, right? And in this example, right, if this is on Pulsex, it's the fees on Pulsex versus the fees on Pulse, right? If there's 10 million bucks that are flowing through this, right, between Pulse and Pulsex, I'm sorry, between Pulse and Hex, 0.29%, right? Then you have a fee. This is from the other day in terms of the data that I put in here. So this is 21.7, right? $29,000 worth of fee, right? Here. And let's see here. This is the total fee amount right here. Total fee right here. I don't know why I didn't label this. Or maybe I accidentally deleted it. 29,000 is the total fee. of the total fee paid, remember, a big portion of this is going to the LP, a little portion is going to Richard, and then the rest of that, $6,093 of Hex and Pulse, price didn't move in the marketplace. Just because people were trading back and forth, creates $6,000 of the selling pressure. Trivial amount? Possibly, I think so, right? But this is still going to be taking place. It could be very large depending on what's happening. And it's just a factor that is systematically going to be selling down on Pulse. Period. I mean, it's just the other way to think about this, if you're like, don't like thinking about the negative side of how things could happen, right? Is like you have $6,293 of buying pressure on Pulsex. Right? That's super, super, super positive. Right? But this is just, it's automatically taking place. Now, showed you all the information that I have on this topic, and I want to know what your thoughts are on this. You can see right here behind us what was said, right? And I'd like to hear your thoughts. What is going on? Is this accurate? Am I missing something, right? Or is Richard missing something in terms of looking at just one game and not thinking about what happens over time, independent of the price? If the price stays exactly the same, you're still going to create selling pressure, period. Because you could have a million going both directions. So I'd like to hear what your thoughts are in the comments. Take a second, share this video so we can get more people opinion on this and actually get a better perspective of what is happening. So appreciate you guys, and I'll talk to you soon. If you want to check out my other channel, it's fitness related, you can check that out. Jump over to my Twitter. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can jump over here, Sam_A_Stolt. Say what's good over there. I'm active on Twitter regularly. Or on my Instagram, there's a link down below. Appreciate you guys. Talk to you soon.